Hello, everyone. I hope everyone survives St. Patty's Day. Dr. Laura and I don't drink, but we like to go out and have a nice plate of corned beef and cabbage, which we did not do this year. We went to my grandson's 7th birthday party instead. Much like the Yankees and Mets, we will have to wait until next year. Although next year is here. The waiting is over. Enough of that nonsense. Section 6 in housekeeping, I want to review the last module. It's module 6. Many of you are going deeper into discussions by finding relevant quote-unquote web links and articles this year, although some of you are still sharing ones that have really nothing to do with our topic, which was creating large-scale standardized tests and comparing them in the cost of that and comparing them to teacher-made tests. One of the things that I ask you to do is that you go in, when you do share a web link, you need to go into and change that URL to a live link. Many of you will see that I have edited your post, and the way you can do that is to click on, and I'll try to find one here. Well, I'll just do it with my my post here. You can see that my links are live here. And any of you can create a live link by highlighting the words. So you highlight it, and then you click on this link icon, link to URL, and then you cut and paste your link into this box and then click the update link. That makes it live, so we don't have to cut and paste it and go out of Canvas. So please do that when you're sharing a link with us. It'll make all of our lives much easier, and people will actually go and read your link. Some of them. The Hard as a Dickens discussion board is closed, and as always, it makes me a little sad because this gets my students really to examine the pros and cons of large-scale tests. It also ferrets out the differences between norm and criterion reference tests. Those are vocabulary words, so you should know those. And it's also part of your final baseline survey. Many people rail against norm reference tests like the SAT, the GRE, most IQ tests, and in most cases rightfully so. They're created to sort and separate, to create a bell curve where 68% of the students are between the -1 and +1 standard deviation. People that use them, like college admissions officers, want to be able to distinguish between test takers to make their selection process easier. There's no other reason. They can just skim off the top, and you can see the good news is that many colleges are making these tests optional, which I mentioned in this discussion board. Also, as we know, they only account for 25% of student success, and that's only in the first year of college. So after the current admission scandal that's going on right now, maybe everyone will jettison these tests. Our state assessments, on the other hand, are criterion referenced and based on our state standards. Theoretically, everyone could get all the questions correct. They are not made to create a spread, only distinguish between those who know the material well and those who don't, which every test should do. If you give a test that's all easy questions, you're not going to figure out who knows it well and who doesn't. So that's what our tests do. Some of you were upset about that. They distinguish between kids who don't know it. Well, yes. That's what every test does. Even your tests do that. The controversy over a state test is how the state creates the cut points for each level, which is done after the test results are completed. So what entails a 1, what entails a 2, what entails a 3, and what entails a 4. And if you have read Popham's chapter on reliability, you know what standard error of measurement is. And much like a survey that you see, polls that are taken, standard error of measurement is about students' individual test scores. And it's always a plus or minus. You know, this score could be a plus or minus 3 or plus or minus 4, which could move a kid up into the next level. So it's important to know what is standard error of measurement. If a few of you commented that teacher-made tests are better than large-scale tests because teachers can design their tests based on their students' ability and learning styles. You can accommodate according to learning styles, but a test can't be created based on a student's learning styles. This is a misconception, because if you start changing your tests based on what you think your students know, you will be doing them a disservice. And you won't be assessing your learning targets. You will be assessing so your students get a good grade. And that doesn't make sense. You can always, you want students to be able to answer those 3 big questions. Where am I going? Those are your learning targets. Where am I now? Get that from your assessments, formative assessments or regular assessments. And how can I close the gap? You can't answer those questions if you're going to fudge your tests to make it easy for the kids. You can always accommodate learning styles by allowing students to take the exam in different areas. So for example, low light, standing up, seated on an exercise ball, etc., etc. Several of you mentioned what I consider is another misconception held by many teachers of students from poverty or students who are learning disabled. Because of these conditions, you felt that the state tests are biased against them. Well, first, there are hundreds of schools in this country where most students are receiving free lunch that are considered high poverty, but they are high achieving schools. So it can be done. So they're getting good test scores and they're coming from poverty. So the tests aren't biased against kids from poverty. They're just biased against kids that don't know it. That isn't a bias, by the way. Second, we grant learning disabled students accommodations to level the playing field. There are only 2 types of biases: offensiveness and unfair penalization. Many of you brought out the opt-out movement. I'm sharing an article from the Washington Post by Strauss. Several of you shared posts by Strauss, who is the education writer for the Washington Post. In this one, she warns us about the new company. It's about New York State. Questar, which took over the contract for our state assessments from Pearson a couple of years ago. In that same article, the author mentions that one of the steps the state has taken to appease parents that are opting out is that tests are no longer timed, which I think most of us agree is a good thing, which according to the article no longer makes the test standardized. I disagree. I disagree that you can make environmental preferences like timing, and we make accommodations for students all the time with special needs to level the playing field. So I'm really at a loss to understand how allowing students to complete an exam and therefore get a complete assessment of what they know or understand or can do affects the standardization of how we can use those results. So I'm confused. Several of you are also discussed how teachers should become involved in creating our state assessments. Now that Pearson is out of the picture, they didn't have this. Teachers weren't allowed to do item writing. They were just involved in final eyes review and things like that. But now the Questar is involved. Teachers can become involved in all aspects of the test creation process. I shared all those in bullets, and I think in every section's discussion board. While some of you felt teachers have enough on your plate, teachers are the ultimate curriculum experts who can learn the intricacies of item writing. One of you said, well, if they don't know how to write test items, what's the difference between a teacher test and writing those items for a large-scale test? Of course, they'll be trained to write items for those large-scale tests. Just like if you're selected to grade the written part of the ELA Regents, you're going to be trained on how to do that. So there's inter-rater reliability, one of our vocabulary words. So you're trained to do that. Many of you interacted with Dr. Tom's teaching memo. I tried to stimulate a reaction by saying that Wiggins blamed you, you teachers, for not designing higher order thinking questions. My wife, who's a school administrator, often sees her teachers struggle with asking higher order questions in the classroom. So I think Wiggins touched a nerve, or a few egos. Several of you took offense that teachers might be part of the problem because they don't know how to create tests that require students to make inferences. I would agree with that. As you will see, when we create our own tests, most of you will struggle with making reasoning questions. I hope my prediction is wrong about that. There was one article, you shared many articles, but there was one shared by Stephen in my 64022 section. It was shared late, so many of you probably didn't see it, even in that section, but I have it here. Regarding the use of test scores to evaluate teachers. This has been a controversy for a long time, ever since No Child Left Behind was enacted into law way back in 2002, I believe. While this is no longer mandated in New York State, and this just was stopped recently, there were still many schools who are using student growth scores, from the time they enter a classroom till the end of the year, which is not bad. But worse, a lot of schools are using test scores by themselves. My stepdaughter, who was placed on an improvement plan, first year teacher given an improvement plan, what a surprise, based on her test scores. So she is now incorporating more test-like assessments into her unit plans, which I would encourage all of you to do. You should read the executive summary of this article. So it's only like three paragraphs to get a feel for this important issue. So I hope you felt this discussion board was worthwhile. I certainly felt it was, and there was hundreds of responses. So I'm pretty impressed by that. Reliability, validity, and fairness are important topics. I've covered it all in one module, which is it's like really compressing it. As Popham claims, teachers need not worry if their tests are not reliable, and certainly no one is going to give their students the same test twice to see if it has test-retest reliability. It's a waste of time. Remember, if your test has validity, and I'm talking about content-related validity, then you needn't be concerned about reliability. If your tests correctly align with your learning targets and there are enough questions for each that allows you to make valid inferences about what your students have mastered, then you have a good handle on content-related validity. The other type of validity that you may encounter is predictive validity, whether a test can accurately foretell how a student will do in the future. I'm sure many of you, I know many of you had bad feelings about the SATs or ACTs, which I mentioned earlier. Research suggests only account for about 25% of student success in the first year of college. You are more likely to encounter this type of validity when using assessments that will indicate the probability of a child's success in kindergarten screening instruments, or first grade. So there are many screening instruments available today, and remember that screening, universal screening, is a part of the response to intervention process. So that's it. We're starting our test creation process this module, and I'm looking forward to coaching everyone on being great test makers.